Hi friends, it's Grace and welcome back to another video. It's been a little bit since I've seen you, but I have quite a few videos in the lineup that I'm excited to do. The last few weeks I just haven't really had anything that I was raring to talk about, so I was just doing the actual reading that provides the content, basically. But the video that I'm going to be doing right now is my March wrap-up, and this was actually quite the prolific reading month for me. So I read 11 books for almost 4,200 pages. 11 books is quite a lot for me. Now, in saying that, 3 of those books were Spiffo 9 finalists that were all fairly short books. So those definitely helped with the number of books that I read, but the books that I read this month, I think on the whole were fairly average when you average them out. I guess it would be almost 400 pages as an average, like the high 300s, if you broke that 4,200 down by 11. And then for my ratings, my average was 3.98. So in that I had 1 3-star, 2 3.25 stars, 1 3.5 star, 2 4 stars, 1 4.25, 3 4.5 stars, and 1 full 5-star read, which once you see the list of books, I feel like this is not going to be overly shocking because it is a book that most people would predict that I would adore and give 5 stars to. So let's just get into what those 11 books are. The first thing I'm going to start off with is I'm going to quickly talk about the 3 Spiffo books that I did read, just because the way that I have been organizing these reviews is that I'm going to have a dedicated review that goes over the final 4 books that I read, and I'm going to break down the rating based on each category that all goes into the scores combined to actually get the rating for each book. So I'm going to break that down. I'll give a synopsis of each book, and that will just be more in depth than this is. But in this, I will tell you my rating and tell you a few thoughts about it, and then I'll just direct you to that video if you're interested in a little bit more in depth. Okay, so I misspoke actually, and I read 4 Spiffo books this month, but the reason that I forgot about that was because one of those was Hills of Heather and Bone by K.E. Andrews, and I actually have already put out the dedicated review that includes Hills of Heather and Bone, so I gave that one a 3.25 star, and I won't get into that just other than saying I did actually finish it in March, but it is in that other video, so I will link that down below. That would be the review that includes Hills of Heather and Bone, The Fall Is All There Is, and The Last Ranger. So if you're interested in my thoughts on any of those 3, you can go check that out. But the other 3 that I finished in the month of March that will be included in the next wrap-up of Spiffo books begins with Arrival Most Vile by R.K. Ashwick, and this was a very charming, sweet, kind of cozy fantasy romance that I gave 4 stars to. I quite enjoyed this. I've seen some people giving it mixed reviews, but I think that that's because it's just not hitting in the right way for some people who don't love the coziness as much, but it really appealed to me. I wasn't sure how I was going to feel about it at the outset. So basically the premise of this book is that we have our main character Ambrose, who runs a potions shop in this town that's sort of set in a canyon, and in the base of it there's shops and houses and everything carved out of the rock, and there is very much a community here in this town, and there's also a lot of people that pass through here because this town is sort of in the middle of a well-traveled area. So these people, Ambrose being a potions master, sell to these adventurers. So a couple of his friends are, for example, a wand maker, or they run an armory and stuff like that. And the inciting incident of the book is that there's a new shop opening up right across the street from Ambrose, but it turns out to actually be another potions shop. So there's some rivalry going on. The new shop owner moves in, and Ambrose really does not like him at first, and the reason that I liked this and enjoyed it is because they really do have kind of a competition and a rivalry going on at the start, and this is not by any means like enemies to lovers necessarily, but there's a healthy dose of dislike, mostly because Ambrose sees him as just coming in as competition for him and just basically making his life harder. But the rest of the characters and the cast of characters and the found family and everything balances it really well, because the group as a whole kind of comes together. Like, the newcomer ends up fitting into the friend group, and through that they kind of end up opening up and getting to know each other more, and there is also another goal of the book that they have to work towards together, and it develops from there. And I just thought that it was a really fun time. So I think I said this already, but I ended up giving Arrival Most Vile 4 stars. Next up, we had The Last Fang of God by Ryan Kirk, and this, based on my Spiffo ranking, rating system, this actually comes out to like a 3.65, but that is so specific. Like, really, it's a 3.5 star book, and Storygraph allows you to rate it like that, which I love, but I ended up giving it a 4 star on Goodreads just because, you know, it's technically higher than a 3.5. Like, it gets a 4, that's okay. So The Last Fang of God by Ryan Kirk has to do with a father-daughter relationship, and essentially the father used to be sort of like a notorious warrior, and he is one of the last, or the last of like his old clan that followed his god. And he came with his wife and unborn daughter to live in a small town and kind of try and escape from that life that he used to live. But it turns out that his daughter, when she is about 16, ends up being called home to this god, and our main character didn't think that she would have enough of that blood in her for her to have to deal with this, but it turns out that she does, and she will have to go through kind of some training and some learning of like magic and runes if she wants to survive this, and she essentially has to go through sort of like some trials or some rites of passage that this god requires any wolves that are part of his clan to undergo. So she doesn't really have a choice, because if she doesn't respond to the call, then she will die. But it's a treacherous journey that they have to make. So this was quite a short book as well, and I enjoyed it. Like, I don't really know what to say about this one, in the sense that, like, I thought the ideas were cool, but there were certain, like, I don't know, there was a certain quality to it that just didn't really let me get fully invested in the book. So it's sort of just that disconnect from an enjoyment perspective, like a pure enjoyment perspective. But I think if that premise sounds interesting to you, then you should definitely give The Last Fang of God a go, because it was an easy read. Like, it's not asking a ton of commitment from you. It's quite short. And it definitely, like, I thought that he executed his ideas pretty well. Maybe I would have even liked it to be a little bit longer, just for my personal tastes and getting connected to the characters, but it was a solid read as well. And then finally, for my March Spiffo books, we have Murder at Spindle Manor. I think that I'm not alone when I sometimes have trouble saying that. It's like my brain wants to say Myrtle at Spindle Manor, which is obviously not the case. What's a myrtle? Well, other than the plant. But anyway, I ended up giving Murder at Spindle Manor 3.25 stars. Our basic premise for this book is that it's sort of like an isolated location. It's not quite a locked door mystery, but it is a situation where we have our investigator who arrives at this, like, it's Spindle Manor, but it's not actually like a house. Like, when I heard the name Spindle Manor, I was kind of imagining that our investigator would be called to a manor where like a family lives and it's like an estate. That's not what this is. Spindle Manor is like a way house, like an inn. And so there's a group of people that happen to be staying there that night, and our huntress happens to know that there is a type of monster hiding somewhere among this group that basically is not human, but if it kills you, it can then replicate you, like thoughts and memories, but only to a certain extent. Like, it's a very good replica, but it can't fully replicate human emotion. So her goal is to basically keep these people here overnight or for however long she can and try and figure out who this monster is, like which one of them has been killed and is actually no longer themselves. So that's the initial mystery to be solved, but things do end up kind of happening and going off the rails, and an actual murder is committed, which also then has to be solved throughout this tumultuous night, because this does happen basically over the course of one day, this whole book. And to be honest with you, I thought I was gonna really love this because I love a good murder mystery, and I think that there are two main reasons why it didn't completely work for me. The first of which is that I felt that we didn't really have the tools to solve the mystery. And I guess in a way that could be kind of obvious because this is a fantasy book, but the reason why I love things like Agatha Christie books, for example, and like the Hercule Poirot mysteries is that you're like, if you're like me, you're probably and or definitely not gonna solve the mystery yourself on the first try, but like once you find out the answer, you can kind of backtrack and you technically could have solved it. Like, you have the tools, you have the knowledge of our own world and the way that things are, that you could work through it and you could see the clues that were left. And I think the problem that I have with a fantasy mystery in general is that if it's a secondary world that we don't necessarily know about, aside from what the author tells us, it's like we can't actually solve anything if it's with information that we don't have because it pertains to the fantasy elements of the world. And so that's kind of one thing that gets me. The second thing is that I did really feel like the book went off the rails. Like, I thought that we were going at a certain pace, and then between like the 70 and 80% mark, I felt like the book just went bananas, and it kind of lost me when it did that. So I still enjoyed the end, but it just ended up at a 3.25 because the way that it ended up going, it just wasn't completely to my taste. However, I still think that it's a fun book and worth a try, worth a recommendation. So I just think that if you are bothered by that same thing as me when it comes to the mystery, you might not like it. So just keep that in mind. But yeah, Murder at Spindle Manor was the final Spiffo book that I finished in March. Okay, so for the rest of these books, my plan is just to go in order that I read them, basically. So the first, or I should say the next book up that I finished is Guns of the Dawn by Adrian Tchaikovsky. This has been on my TBR truly for so long, and I mean, I'm so happy that I picked it up in March, but looking back, I'm just disappointed that it took me this long. I think it's just because I didn't have any experience with Adrian Tchaikovsky, so when I thought about it, it was quite an unknown quantity to me. Like, I thought that I would like it, but I really didn't know. And I'm just happy to say that I enjoyed this so much, and I gave it 4.5 stars. So if you follow Alan from the Library of Alexandria, I'm sure that you have heard this book pitched a number of times. Alan is the person who originally inspired me to buy it, and ultimately also to pick it up. It's just that I never ended up picking it up back in that time when I wanted to originally. So basically, this book follows our main character, Emily Marshwick, and we are dealing with this world that is, what's the word I'm looking for? I always have trouble with these. It's not steampunk, it's the gunpowder one. Let's just call it gunpowder fantasy for now until I remember what this is called. But Emily Marshwick is a gentlewoman that is part of a family that is not nobility per se, but they own like a house, they have an estate, they have like a few servants, they live a very genteel lifestyle. And the first like incident that happens that has not directly affected them yet is that war breaks out between their country and the neighboring country. And at first, the armies are fighting in this war, you know, as one does. Next, like, they need a draft of able-bodied men. Like, they need not just the army, but they need more men. Next, it's like they need even more, like, they need the younger boys and they need the older men. And like, finally, when the supply essentially is depleted, they start also needing the women. Like, clearly this war is not going well. And Emily Marshwick has two sisters, but they have like a couple of servants, and our main character Emily is like, no, like, we're not sending anyone else that can't, you know, say no or make their own decisions. Like, I'm going, like, for this family, like, I will go. And she goes to war, and it's, most of the book follows that storyline, although there is so much more that happens in here. Like, I guess there are, like, the way that this is described is sort of like Jane Austen meets like military fantasy, and it is very true. Like, there are some of those aspects of like more of the romance and the balls and the, I don't know, like, any woman or any man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife, like, you know, vibes. But it's so much more than that, and it ends up being such a phenomenal combination. Adrian Tchaikovsky's writing is so good, the characters are so good, everything, like the plot throughout, I was very enamored, and like, I found this very compelling. Not to mention that it's a standalone, so I would recommend it so strongly. Like, if you find this idea interesting, I loved it. Next up, we have The Wisdom of Crowds by Joe Abercrombie, which, as a shock to precisely no one, is my one full 5-star of the month. I don't really know what I can say about Wisdom of Crowds that I have not already said about Joe Abercrombie, because, like, he does have twists and turns in his books, but a lot of the time, like, when you're reading his series, the books are a natural progression of one another, and especially this final trilogy, it is, like, even now that I've been finished this book for 3 weeks maybe, it becomes hard to delineate between, like, A Little Hatred, The Trouble with Peace, The Wisdom of Crowds. Like, you can remember some main events from each book, but there is very much an overall progression to the story, and he's not really focused on pacing for a particular book. I feel like he's focused on the story that he's telling over the entire series, and that's not to say that the pacing isn't good in each book, because it is, but I think what I'm trying to say is that it's not the type of series, and he's not the type of author where, like, he's going to try and surprise you, where, like, events might happen where you'll be surprised or you'll feel things, but they've been set up and they've been, like, they rest on the backs of what came before them, and it's in the best way possible that I say that, because you can see from the way that he writes, like, maybe you think a character is doomed because they just make freaking terrible decisions, and a lot of the times people end up getting what they ultimately deserve. Some people don't. Some people rise to the top even if they're terrible, but a lot of people end up not great. But this has got to be, like, one of my favorite series of all time. It's definitely up there, like, rivaling Robin Hobb's Realm of the Elderlings. I'm going to never stop recommending The First Law World, probably. Like, I already want to reread it. It's that type of vibe. So, as you can tell, like, this is the 3rd book in a trilogy and the 9th book in the overall series, so, like, not really talking about what actually happens in here. I'm just gonna say how good it was, because it was. So, that's it. Okay, next up, I read Our Wives Under the Sea by Julia Armfield, which was another 4.5 stars. I just had, like, a few bangers back to back to back there, and I love when that happens. Like, I was enjoying my reading so much during that mid portion of March, and later too, but, like, Guns at the Dawn, followed by Wisdom of Crowds, followed by this. It was truly great. So Our Wives Under the Sea follows our main character, I think it's Miri, Yeah, it's Miri. I, for some reason, thought I had that name wrong. So Miri is the perspective that we're in, and Miri's wife, Leah, was working on this expedition that took a submarine down into like very, very deep depths of the ocean, and they were going down to do like an exploratory mission. And so at the beginning of this book, like her wife, Leah, has come back. Like, this submarine was thought to be lost for a long time, and things didn't go as planned, and they were like missing for almost 6 months. But Leah eventually came back. It's just that Miri is not sure if she came back the same. Like, and it's hard to explain how exactly or why, but it just seems like she's not right, and things kind of continue to deteriorate the longer that she's home and the longer that things don't seem to be going back to normal. But the nice thing and the very interesting thing about this book is that this is very literary horror, because we get the, I guess you could call it like the main storyline or the main timeline of this marriage kind of collapsing in a very melancholy, heartbreaking way because of the fact that this is not the same person that left. But you also get flashbacks to Leah's time on this submarine, and like you get to see what was happening to them, and it's very suspenseful. And I think that it's important to go into this knowing that it does read more literary than thrilling. And I know that some people had complaints about the ending, but I think that I went in with the proper expectations that this book wasn't going to do anything like explosive. It was just going to chart the course that it was charting from the beginning, which is more of a slow-paced, slow burn. And I loved it. Like, I was so happy with where this went. I do think that it does, like, falling flat isn't the right word because it's a book that I loved, but it does kind of stay consistent, I guess. And there is a bit of a climax, but for the most part it stays consistent. Like, it is what it is. You get what, like, you kind of can see what you're in for from the beginning, and you get what you get. So if you like it, I feel like you'll probably continue to like it. But yeah, like, this is not long. I think I finished it in 2 days because once I got to a certain point, I just could not stop reading. And it's not even, like I said, because it was necessarily thrilling, but it was extremely compelling, and I just like could not wait to find out how it ended. So this was another absolute banger for this month. Next up, we have Beach Read by Emily Henry, which I gave 4.25 stars to. This was really, really fun, but also just like really good in general, because the thing that I really like about Emily Henry and her romances so far is that she really kind of has her characters going through it. Like, and I'm not somebody that dislikes a light, fluffy romance, but I think that the reason why it's so much easier for me to find a deeper connection to her books is because she does have characters that are kind of going through it. Like, and it's not even just that they're necessarily having relationship troubles. Like, a lot of her characters have like deeper life problems that they're also working on, and like the romance doesn't fix that, but it does kind of provide them with someone to connect to, and it provides them with some safe space maybe in their life. So in this book we have January Andrews, is it? Yes, last name right and everything, and Augustus Everett. And so they are both novelists, and they both know each other because they went to college together. And at the present time, Augustus Everett lives in a house on the beach on like in this small town in Michigan, maybe. And January, on the other hand, ends up like temporarily moving into the house beside him on the beach because her objective is to clean it up and sell it after her father has passed away, but she's also struggling with more than just her father's passing, also things that she did not know about her dad while he was alive. So she realizes that her kind of old college rival is her next door neighbor and is not super thrilled about it at first, but they end up making this deal where they will sort of like swap literary personas. Like they're each going to write a book for the summer, but their objective will be that she is going to try and write a more heavy-hitting literary book like what Augustus would usually write, or August, not Augustus. Yeah, no, Augustus. Sorry. I read another book with a main character named August, so it's really screwing with me. Augustus normally writes the more heavy literary fiction, and January usually writes like nicer, more fun romance with happy endings, or like even if it's not light and fluffy, she likes her happy endings. And so the goal is that he is then going to try and write something like what she would normally write, and that's their challenge to help them overcome writer's block and to try and like give them more inspiration, and basically like whoever manages to sell their book first wins their bet. And it kind of just goes from there. Like we spend the summer seeing how it goes, seeing how their relationships develop, what else they're dealing with in their life outside of this place and outside of this summer. And I really enjoyed it. Like very solid. Happy Place is still my favorite Emily Henry at this point, but Beach Read is definitely in second place. Okay, next up we had Never Whistle at Night, which is a dark Indigenous fiction anthology, and this has many authors, but it's edited by Shane Hawk and Theodore C. Van Alst Jr. So this, like, to be completely honest, it's a little bit of a disappointment for me. I ended up giving the collection as a whole 3 stars. I do have some tabs in here. There are 8 of them because out of 26 stories, there were 8 of them that I felt like I could say that I actually liked, like felt positively about. And so those were Kashtuka by Matilda Zeller, Quantum by Nick Medina, Snakes Are Born in the Dark by D.H. Trujillo, Night in the Chrysalis by Tiffany Morris, Sundays by David Heskewan Blee Wyden, The Scientist's Horror Story by Darcy Littlebadger, Collections by Amber Blazer Wardzala, and Limbs by Waukesha Rice. So there were other stories in here that I didn't mind, or like stories where like they weren't to my taste, but I could see what they were doing. And then there were stories in here that I just found like boring or that I didn't really like. And the thing is, like, even though overall I really didn't like or love this collection that much, I don't really feel negatively about it as a concept itself, because I feel like we need more of this, and this is a really great idea. And like when you think about like dark fiction or horror, of course not all of the stories are going to work for me, because horror as a genre, even more than most genres, in my opinion, is so subjective and so specific. Like people have certain types of horror that they like and do not like, and this is 26 different authors, so like 26 different styles, and definitely some types of horror in here that just don't work for me. But of course, I'm not going to like the same stories in here as someone else would, and I absolutely don't want to like discourage more projects like this from being made. Like I would try another one for sure. So basically, you know, some mixed emotions, but that's how I feel about it overall. Okay, next up we have our book with a main character named August, and that is Spells for Forgetting by Adrienne Young. So this, I'm so happy to say that I adored this. I gave it 4.5 stars. This is like, I said in my review on Goodreads, I'm like, this feels like a book that is literally written for me. Like they looked at my tastes and were like, okay, we're gonna pull all of these things. And I'm not somebody who likes it when you try and sell me a book just by telling me the tropes. Like it kind of annoys me, because I'm like, well, just because I know like something about it doesn't mean that it's good. Like the writing still has to be good, the story still has to be good. Like I'm not somebody who usually will be like, oh, enemies to lovers with like blah 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 other trope, I'm sold. Like I don't know if that makes sense. However, this book has like a autumnal small town setting with like a witchy magical vibe to the whole thing, which is an atmosphere that I really like in the first place. And in addition to that, it has like a well done romantic subplot, and it has like a very intriguing murder mystery with like the small town vibes playing into that, and the way that people are in small towns, like very insular and like defensive and like, I don't know. So I really loved a lot about this because like there was magic. I love a good like murder mystery, and I really, really enjoyed her writing, and I just thought that the whole thing was so well done and like essentially just perfect for my taste. But obviously the slow burn of it all and the way we got to know the characters and the actual writing itself were a huge factor in my enjoyment for this, because I know that a few people that I follow, like for example Gabby from Gabby Reads, didn't really like how slow moving this was, but ironically enough, her saying that made me think that I probably would like it more. And luckily I was right about that. So this has really, really made me want to like pick up her other book, The Unmaking of June Farrow. And I know that Adrienne Young has more books than just that, but I think the others are YA. So I think that I would definitely consider picking those up in the future, but they're not like as high on the priority list. But yeah, I loved this so much. Finally, we have a young adult romantasy, and that is Once Upon a Broken Heart by Stephanie Garber. So I had a lot of fun reading this. I gave it 4 stars. I just found the entire story and the book, like the atmosphere, to be very charming and whimsical. So we have our main character, Evangeline Fox, which is a very fun name to begin with. And Evangeline is heartbroken at the beginning of the book because she had a boy that she was in love with and that she thought was in love with her as well, but he is getting married to someone else. And this world has these godlike beings called fates. They're not quite gods, but they are immortal, and they can help you make deals and help you through magic, but they require something in return. So she goes to the fate called the Prince of Hearts. Yeah. I don't know why that sounded wrong. And his name is Jax, and she basically begs him to help her stop the wedding. And in exchange, he demands like 3 kisses from her. So like she will kiss someone whenever he chooses, like strategically for him to gain. And so she makes that deal, but things kind of go awry, and the plot takes our character in a lot of different directions that like I don't really want to talk about without spoiling how the beginning of the book, like what direction that goes in. Just that things kind of go wrong, and then she ends up in a different situation that she expected herself to be in. And the whole thing was just very fun. And there were a lot of times during this where I thought like, oh, that's a little bit weird. I don't really like where this is going, but then the problem would actually kind of like fix itself, or it would explain itself, or I would be like, oh, where are we going with this? And then like it would answer that question. So I ended up just having a really good time. It was a really fun ride, and I'm really looking forward to continuing with this trilogy, just because I think it's going to be a lot of fun that's just easy to read. And it's really nice to have these types of books in between other bigger things, because I don't know, just a lot of whimsy, and it makes me happy while I read it. Okay, so that is it for the 11 books that I read in the month of March. Quite a mix of things, honestly, but a lot of books that I really, really enjoyed. So I hope that if you are interested in any of these, that maybe I sold you on them, because I would definitely recommend a bunch of these books, especially those ones that I rated really, really highly. And let me know down in the comments maybe what your favorite books of the month of March were, or what you think about the books I read and my thoughts on them. I would love to hear from you. Please like this video if you liked it, subscribe if you want to see more from me, and as always, I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!